Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Thanks for being here. So today we're going to talk a little bit about a Tach and wiring that into your existing system, regardless of if you've got an MSD box or not. So we're going to talk about the ignition system in general for a little bit, and I want to make note of something for you guys. So this is a Chilton's book, or Haynes manual actually, for those of you that have never used one. Great wiring reference. I've got some other videos that I use this in too, but at any rate, this is what I want you guys to note here. So your coil gets a 12 volt signal in hot or run, and then that negative signal is given from the ECU to fire the coil over to your distributor. So your ignition module, this is your TFI, is going to give a signal to the ECU saying, hey, I'm in a position to fire, and then it gives a signal for the coil to fire. So this signal coming from the ECU is a ground signal, and every time the magnetic pickup in the distributor is where it needs to fire, then it gives a signal to the ECU, and the ECU says, hey, go ahead and fire. It's pretty simple. So on your coil, what you'll notice is that you'll have a red wire that is going to be hot all the time. If you just turn your key on and your car's not running, you'll get 12 volts on that signal. And then your coil will fire when that negative signal is given. So typically, like on your stock dash, that wire is what is giving a signal to your Tach every time it's firing. And then your Tach is dependent on what engine you've got. So if you've got, like this is for an 8-cylinder, you can see, if you have an 8-cylinder, it counts those, and every eight sparks is a revolution. So it'll count that as 1 RPM. Obviously that happens 1,000 times a second, or minute rather, sorry, revolutions per minute. So what happens when you've got an MSD box? Well, when you have an MSD box, your coil, your signal for the coil to fire is actually coming from the MSD box, right? So I have another video, and I'll throw a link right up here for you guys. But when you run an MSD box, you can't wire your Tach directly off of the signal going to your coil. If you do that, you can fry your Tach because of the signal that the MSD box is given. So you can either use a Tach adapter, this one has an output on it, or what I would suggest is wiring off of this signal from the ECU. And the stock wire that is inside the car is typically going to be what you can use. Now that depends on where you wire in your MSD box. Obviously, if you're wiring it right outside of the, like in the engine compartment right here, and you're just right off of the coil signal, what you're doing is interrupting this guy here and this guy here, right? So your MSD connects right onto both sides of the coil there. So you can still wire into this signal because that's what your ignition module or your ECU is giving it to fire. So this ground signal here is what you want to use for your Tach. You don't have to have a Tach adapter. All you're looking for is that ground signal so that your Tach can count how many sparks you're getting, and then in turn say how many revolutions you have. So that's what you're looking for. Let's go take a look inside the car and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so you can see here that the Tach that I'm using is not a monster Tach, but it's still the same premise. So my Tach has that negative signal I was talking about, and what I did is I removed my stock dash and I made a custom one, and I connected the negative signal for the Tach to the wire that was for the existing Tach in here. And there's some people that are going to argue that that signal is not as accurate as if you would connect right out there at the box or whatever. And my comment to that is that's false. All you're looking for is the signal that is triggering your ignition to fire. Now this Tach is, this is dead on compared to what my ECU is seeing. But there's never been an issue with this. It runs flawless. It's a great way to hook it up. You can get the MSD Tach adapters, but if you're looking at where you're wiring that signal into, whether it's on the MSD box in the ignition bay itself or right here, that wire still is getting the same ground signal regardless of where it's at. So wiring it out there versus in here is kind of it's not really even an issue. So let's pop this out and I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. Alright guys, so here is a wiring diagram for a typical Tach. And your Tach input, you can see it's telling you to go to the negative side of your coil. But like we talked about with the MSD, you cannot use that negative signal that's going to the coil from the MSD box, because you can fry your coil here, because it gives a different type of signal to try to make that spark hotter. So this right here is showing your coil, your negative side goes your Tach input. This green and white wire is what goes out there to my Tach input, which is right here. So at any rate, I was attempting to show you is the connection to it. So your Tach input here, that is your negative signal, and you can look at most of all of your wiring harnesses or wiring diagrams will be the same for this, right? So this is your Tach connection to the negative side of the coil. Just remember that if you're using an MSD box, you don't have to have the Tach adapter, as long as you are connected prior to right here, right? So your MSD box, and I'll put a wiring diagram in the video, but your MSD box will connect to both sides of your coil here. So what you want to do is connect to the side of that ground signal for your coil that is before the MSD box. That's all you're going to do. And let's take a look. Let's take a look at that now. All right, guys, so let's talk a little bit about your Tach and wiring in to your existing ignition system. So you can see that I've got there's your distributor, there's your coil, and there's your ECU. Right, so your distributor's here. You've got 12 volts positive going into the distributor and also going into the coil. You also have it in the ECU, but I'm trying not to clutter it up here, so pardon that. Then your negative signal on the coil is triggered by the ECU from the distributor. I don't have that in there anyway. All we're worried about is this, right? So your Tach needs to be connected at this point over here. If you put an MSD box, though, it's got to be a little bit different, right? So here's your in to the MSD and your out. And I'll kind of explain to you a little bit about that. When you're wiring in your MSD, you'll go right in here, right? So your input to the MSD box will come from this guy. So you'll have your 12 volts will connect here. And then your negative signal in will connect from here. Then your output connects directly to your coil. So that's how an MSD setup will be. So you can see your input to the MSD box is taking a constant 12 volts in run or hot, and then that negative trigger to fire. And then it is giving it a lot hotter signal, and the positive negatives here to fire that coil. So you do not want to connect your Tach right? So there's your Tach, and this is your signal wire. You do not want to connect here. That is not where you want to connect. The output to the coil, that will screw up your Tach. So what you're going to do here is find that signal wire from the ECU that's on the input of the MSD box. That is how you're going to connect it right there. As long as you're on the inside of the MSD box, you're not going to hurt anything, and then you also don't have to have a Tach adapter. Most of the Tach adapters will come from here, and it'll give you a different, I mean, it's the same signal. It literally is the same signal. And then your tach here, you've got your selector switch. So it's typically 2, 4, 6, 8 cylinders, right? So when you select that, it'll count how many ground signals it sees. And when it sees 6 of them, it'll say, hey, that's 1 revolution per minute. So obviously when your car's running, it'll see a ton of those, and then you'll get your true RPM. So hopefully that helps you guys. If you have any more questions, put them in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Comment, like, subscribe.